there was a woman that came into a hospital in Boston with a tumor in her chest. And at the time, they had PET scans, which detect metabolism. It's like, a CT scan or MRI looks at the structure of the body. PET scan doesn't give you structure, it gives you metabolism. And so we use it to measure tumors and hearts to look for how much energy is being consumed, generated by it. And tumors are light up. So this woman with a tumor in her chest got a PET scan, and guess what? The thing in her chest lit up like a firework. Okay. And so then they biopsied it, and they took it out the biopsy and looked into the microscope, now very sophisticated microscope. Guess what? Not a cancer. It was not a cancer. It was a hibernoma. Okay. It was a piece of brown fat that was a tumor. And so one of the researchers, Ronald Kahn, who's an endocrinologist, I wonder if other PET scans are showing these hibernomas. We just missed them. Maybe, like the radiologist just blew it off because it looked like a little thing lighting up someplace, but we weren't looking for them because they weren't where the cancer was or the heart or whatever. And he went back and looked at 1,000 PET scans from patients that had been studied in the hospital. And he found, some of them had them and some of them didn't, right? Classic scientist dilemma. So is it just BS? Is it just an artifact? What is it? Then he thought about it. And this is the mark of a really brilliant scientist. He said, originally brown fat was found in hibernating animals who are cold. So he checked the weather forecast and he correlated the temperature, the weather forecast that was taken on the day of these 1,000 patients who got their PET scan. And he found that in warm weather in the summer, that hardly picked up anything, but all the brown fat was picked up in the bodies in these PET scans during the winter months. Now, where did they find it? Just what I told you, around the neck and the chest, packed in the belly. And I actually, because you sort of need to see this to believe it, I actually got permission from the researchers to put the actual pictures of the brown fat lighting up in my book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, because I want people to see there's a lot of brown fat in adults. You got to see it to believe it.
Now, it atrophies a lot in most unhealthy adults who are not regularly exposing themselves to the cold. Is that correct? And do you know if what you just described about the summer versus winter months is very interesting. And that suggests that there's a seasonal atrophy and a seasonal regain of that tissue. But I guess two quick questions to wrap up. One is it possible in somebody who has very atrophied brown fat tissue to stimulate the formation or the synthesis of more brown fat tissue from nutrients alone, or does it require regular cold exposure? And did you find any research to suggest a synergy between using some of these nutrients from food combined with regular cold exposure?
Yeah, so the whole idea of cold exposure is that definitely activates and exercises your brown fat. You have more hypertrophy or more development of brown fat. By the way, they saw this in the Scandinavian outdoor workers, people who are working outdoors in Scandinavian, lumberjacks and such, much more brown fat because they're outside all the time.
Right.
And by the way, so what is this fat trying to do? Probably try to keep core body temperatures up a little bit, right? It makes total sense that this would actually exist. As opposed to atrophy, it is true that there is sort of a decline in the amount of brown fat with aging, but it turns out that you can actually bring it back. And studies have been done by understanding the mechanisms of this. And, I don't know if we have the time to really dive into all the details of the mechanism, but we understand that cold temperatures, stimulates norepinephrine, which is kind of a stress hormone. And stress hormone goes down from our brain, released from our brain, goes down the nerves to the brown fat, and it turns on the brown fat. It fires it up. It's like putting a long matchstick into the gas burner when your clicker is not working. Whoosh, you get it going. All right. It turns out that, however, cold temperature isn't the only thing that can trigger the norepinephrine. And by the way, that norepinephrine activates the beta-3 adrenergic receptor, which then there's a domino effect. The beta-3 adrenergic receptor on brown fat goes down to the mitochondria in the cell of a fat cell, which then has something called UCP1, uncoupling protein 1. That's basically like a trigger, like on a pistol. When you press that trigger, boom, you light up that mitochondria, that nuclear reactor, and you start the brown fat. So what's interesting is to ask, well, what else can stimulate this pain? And it turns out that there are drugs. In fact, there's a drug called mirabegron that's approved for treating bladder spasm that specifically activates the beta-3 adrenergic receptor, and which then activates the uncoupling protein 1, which then activates the mitochondria, which then fires up your brown fat. And clinical studies have been done at the National Institutes of Health showing that mirabegron at much higher doses than you safely give for bladder spasm actually will light up all that brown fat. Okay, so number one, we know that pharmaceuticals can actually do it, and the future of fat management isn't going to be like the Wegovy's and Ozempics and stuff like that. I mean, really, it's probably going to be figuring out how to manipulate these very, very fine, detailed pathways. But until that time, it turns out that foods can also trigger the same pathway. So chili peppers. Turns out if you have chili flakes, the stuff you put on your pizza, you get that zing or hot sauce. The buffalo wings. The capsaicin in chili peppers is a bioactive, binds to the receptor on your tongue. And again, not to confuse people, but we know the names of these things. TRPV1. Okay, it's a transit receptor of vanilloid peptide 1. I gave very simple examples earlier about the car and the driver. I want you to know, as a scientist, like we can go there and like really dig down into the mechanisms, but I think it's hard for people to understand and keep track of. But when you put the hot chili pepper flake on your tongue, it basically is like putting a key into a lock and turning the switch. Your tongue sends a text message as a signal to your brain to release two things. One, endorphins. This was why some people feel good hormones, which is why some people really love chili peppers, are kind of addicted. The second thing it triggers your brain to release, norepinephrine. And so you can feel this in a quiet room. If you were to actually eat something spicy in a room and you turn off the lights, so you're just paying attention to yourself, put yourself in a Zen state, you eat that chili pepper, you will literally feel the nerves lighting up in your head, down your neck, and lighting up your brown fat. It's really amazing. Try that next time you're having something spicy. Just close your eyes and pay attention to your body. You feel it lighting up. Beta adrenergic receptor activated by the norepinephrine lights up UCP1, turns on the mitochondria. Boom, you've actually turned on your brown fat. This has been studied specifically. Brown fat lights up, burns fuel, draws it from harmful white fat, and now you've elevated your metabolism within the normal range, okay, towards the upper level of normal, and you're starting to consume energy, consume fuel, and you burn down and you start to shrink body fat. And you'll lose weight, you'll actually shrink your waistline, actually, and you'll improve your other metabolic parameters, like insulin resistance will start to recede, reverse in some cases, and your fat mass will also decline as well. So chili peppers is just one example of the 149 other foods I actually talk about in my new book.